The chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Neil Chatterjee.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be a Flashpoint speaker here today. I really appreciate Matt's invitation and the opportunity to be a part of the important exchange of ideas that happens here at the Concordia Annual Summit. At FERC, we regulate the nation's wholesale electricity markets, natural gas infrastructure, pipeline transportation rates, and the security of the electricity grid. In my 2 years at the Commission, I've come to really internalize how the work we do affects nearly every corner of America and every facet of our economy. Energy is the lifeblood of our economy. It heats people's homes, lights our streets, and fuels our transportation networks. And energy provides jobs. More than 6.7 million Americans work in the energy industry, and that number continues to increase. It's an exciting time to be at the helm of FERC and to be focused on policies that help unleash the power of our energy economy. Our energy economy is in a period of significant and historic change. There are many drivers of this, but I'll focus on two in particular today. First, efficient hydraulic fracturing or fracking technologies have opened up previously inaccessible natural gas reservoirs for production, unlocking an abundant, affordable supply in the United States. Last year, U.S. natural gas production hit historic levels. Proven reserves of U.S. natural gas, meaning those recoverable under existing economic and operating conditions, are enough to satisfy U.S. domestic demand for 16 years at current consumption levels. Estimates for future natural gas reserves range much higher and could expand further as drillers find more efficient and cheaper ways to extract natural gas. Given this extensive new gas supply, in 2017, the United States became a net exporter of natural gas for the first time in 60 years. Our net exports of natural gas continued to grow in 2018 according to the International Energy Agency, between now and 2024, the United States will account for 35% of the world's growth in gas production and more than half of the world's growth in gas exports. With this readily available supply, U.S. natural gas is inexpensive, and gas power plants are extremely cost competitive in the U.S. marketplace. And as a consequence, older, more traditional sources of generation, such as coal and nuclear, have a tough time competing. In 2018, most of the plant retirements in U.S. organized markets came from coal, and the largest shares of generation additions came from a combination of natural gas and renewable resources. That brings me to the next key driver of our changing energy landscape, the increasing deployment of renewables. Earlier this summer, FERC issued a report showing that U.S. renewable generating capacity has only recently edged out our coal generating capacity for the very first time, but just barely. Coal and renewables each represent about 22% of our capacity, but the share of renewables is only expected to grow each year. Importantly, I think the continued growth of cleaner energy resources will be driven by market forces. More and more, private capital is understanding that clean energy in America makes good business sense. The capital costs of clean energy resources are dropping rapidly. Bloomberg New Energy Finance estimates that the cost of onshore wind and solar PV fell 18% in the first half of 2018 alone. These declines make it possible for clean energy resources to compete with more traditional generation sources on cost alone. And there's a growing market demand for carbon-free generation in our country. City and municipal governments are demanding increased renewables. For example, the city of San Diego set a goal of being 100% renewable by 2035, and as part of their commitment to corporate sustainability, 2/3 of Fortune 100 companies are procuring renewable energy to meet their goals. These significant changes, the rise of renewables and the shale revolution, are changing the nation's fuel mix and shaping much of our work at FERC. Given this changing landscape, I'd like to touch on some key areas of focus for me. I'll start with the work we do on natural gas infrastructure. I think it's hard to overemphasize this point. The rise of shale gas has created a strategic opportunity for our country on the global stage. Since coming to FERC, I've met with representatives from the UK to India to Japan, And the message I've received over and over again is the United States is uniquely poised to help meet international demand for gas. For example, Europe is becoming increasingly dependent on natural gas imports and is pursuing LNG imports to diversify its portfolio and decrease its dependence on Russian gas. So right now, our nation has both the opportunity and ability to compete with other powerful and in some cases hostile nations in world gas markets. I also want to discuss the environmental benefits of natural gas. I am a Republican from Kentucky, the heart of coal country, but I'm a firm believer that climate change is real and it's incumbent upon all of us to confront it. So this point about natural gas shouldn't get lost in the conversation. Natural gas can displace generation that's more carbon intensive and thus contribute to efforts to lower emissions both here in the U.S. and abroad. What does all of this mean for me and FERC? It means we have to make sure that we have a flexible, effective framework for evaluating certificate applications for natural gas pipelines and LNG import and export facilities. Our work enables the development of the infrastructure projects that are needed to connect U.S. natural gas supplies with global demand. So we've responded by cutting through red tape and reducing interagency friction while also working to recruit the best new talent everywhere we could find it. We are also focusing our staff resources and expertise by creating a new division of LNG facility review and inspection and opening up an office in the Houston area that will give us access to that area's rich talent pool. I'm proud of these process and organizational changes, but I'm also pleased that over this past year, we were able to buckle down and engage in some good old-fashioned bipartisan compromise and agree on a basic framework for how to discuss climate change impacts in our LNG orders. And I'm committed to doing what I can to keep things moving on these critical project applications because the stakes really are high in this strategic moment. I'd like to take a moment to shift away from the work we do on natural gas and talk a little bit about what we're doing to level the playing field for storage resources on the electric side. I believe our work in this area will fundamentally alter the way that we generate, distribute, and consume energy. Energy storage is a key part of our energy future as we integrate renewable energy resources into our grid. To state the obvious, wind and solar generation resources are intermittent. When the wind isn't blowing or when the sun isn't shining, they aren't producing electricity. But when storage technologies like batteries are co-located with wind and solar, that's truly a game changer. So that's why I'm really proud of the significant step we took last year to unleash the power of storage technology. We issued Order 841, a rulemaking that required regional market operators to facilitate the participation of energy storage resources in their markets. Order 841 grew out of a concern that storage technologies didn't have adequate opportunity to compete in all organized markets. By its very nature, storage didn't fit neatly into some of the other participation models the markets had established. It was a textbook example of artificial barriers to entry that not only hamper the continued development of storage, but more importantly, result in higher costs for customers. This year, we affirmed Order 841, and though we faced some opposition, I firmly believe that we got it right. We took the right steps to unleash the potential of storage technologies, and we still have work ahead of us. Right now, we are closely reviewing the various markets' proposals for how they will meet the mandates of this new rule, and after that, the hard work of implementation will begin. So we've rolled up our sleeves on this important issue. Before I close, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we at the Commission are doing to spur investment and get the right transmission infrastructure in place. From my start at the Commission, a key focus for me has been on our transmission policies. Transmission is one of those unique issues in our government that tends to garner broad support from leaders across the political spectrum. Right now, we have the opportunity to create the type of regulatory environment that's necessary to spur smart investments in tomorrow's grid. What do I mean by that? Well, we need a grid that provides a high degree of reliability, but that's also flexible enough to accommodate the fast pace of change we've all been discussing. And that will take investment, a lot of it. For example, a transmission nonprofit issued a report earlier this year projecting that the U.S. will require $30 to $90 billion in incremental transmission investments by 2030 to accommodate the pace of change. Now, that's just one study, of course, but it speaks to the fact that getting the necessary transmission projects financed and built will be no small task. So what are some of the things that FERC can do in the near to medium term? Earlier this year, the Commission opened up a proceeding to examine our transmission incentives policy. Back in 2005, FERC received new statutory authority to use transmission incentives to help ensure reliability and reduce congestion on our grid. And the Commission's current incentives policy compensates transmission developers for the risks and challenges faced by specific transmission projects, such as the difficulty of obtaining state permits, the challenges facing construction, and the use of novel technologies. But in the past 13 years under this policy, we've done a lot of learning about what makes sense and what doesn't. My colleagues and I have come to realize that rather than focus on compensating developers for risks, we should consider shifting our focus to fostering transmission projects that provide the greatest benefit to consumers. So we've asked industry and stakeholders for input on how to shift our incentives paradigm. We're also examining the Commission's return on equity, or ROE, policies. I believe we have to ensure that transmission projects can compete for capital, so I'm excited about our work to update our ROE policies. I recognize that incentives and returns for investors are just a piece of the puzzle when it comes to modernizing our transmission infrastructure, but I'm really looking forward to scoping out some smart, high-impact changes that we can make to encourage the right transmission investments. I think that's about all I have time for. It's been great to be here and to share a little bit about our work at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and what I'm seeing on the horizon in energy. Thank you.
Seems so kind. Out of love.